Now, over the years, whistleblowers in South Africa have been increasingly faced with threats to their lives and some ultimately being killed. But what has blowing the lid looked like in the past? Senior Postdoctoral Research Fellow at the University of Johannesburg is one of the authors of a paper titled Truth to Power, a history of whistleblowing in South Africa. And it explores the stories of whistleblowers in the past 5 decades. He joins us now to talk to us about what has changed over the years, if at all. Dr. Yugesho Radovic, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this morning. So you have dedicated a lot of your research to the intricacies of group dynamics, ethics, and what you call the critical role of whistleblowing. I just want us maybe to start with the theoretical and the contextual foundations of whistleblowing, particularly given South Africa's history. And with that historical context, do you think that social political context within South Africa have shaped the risks and realities that are faced by whistleblowers? And how have we transitioned from apartheid to democracy, and how has that influenced the culture of whistleblowing?
Hi, Kadleko, and thanks for having me. So a very, very intricate and very important question. The socio-political contexts have absolutely shaped how disclosures are made and why they are made, and also the responses to disclosures. But to first and foremost, I would like to address a definition or how we understand whistleblowing. So what whistleblowing essentially is when an insider, or an organizational insider, reports what he or she believed to be perceived wrongdoing to an authority that can effect action. So that insider term is quite loose in that sense. So it doesn't necessarily only have to be an employer or a worker as per the Particular Disclosures Act, but it can also be a family member, for example, that's privy to such information. In South Africa, we have seen a significant shift in disclosures pre-democracy, so from autocratic rule, i.e. apartheid, to democratic rule, in that we never had something called the Protected Disclosures Act, and we never had a constitution for all of the state's citizens. The constitution, which was ratified in '96 and then put into effect in February '97, needed to have laws to support the citizens and to support itself. And once the Protected Disclosures Act of 2000 was put into place, we saw a rapid increase in the amount of disclosures. But that legislation, the Protected Disclosures Act itself, still remains highly flawed, even after its 2017 amendment.
Speaking about that being flawed, I mean, the Protected Disclosures Act surely has brought some kind of balance between protecting whistleblowers and also getting those that are perpetrators to be held accountable. Where do you think it falls short?
It falls short in that it uses a very specific category for what constitutes wrongdoing. So it's got a couple of, in the amendment, it has a couple of points for what should constitute wrongdoing. And what that does, it narrows the scope of behaviors that qualify for wrongdoing, which narrows the scope or the range of individuals that will qualify for protection under the Act. It also doesn't extend protection to family, those mistaken as whistleblowers. The burden of proof, according to the PDA, resides on the whistleblower to prove that they've been retaliated against, not on the organization to prove that they are committing retaliation. And then there's the issue of physical retaliation, which is what is in the news now as I was listening to the lead up to this interview, and the danger of physical retaliation. And the only retaliation protection mechanisms that exist, or rather instruments that would exist for whistleblowers, would be the Protection from Harassment Act of 2011 and criminal law. There is no specific provision within the PDA or its amendment.
I mean, speaking about the lead up to this conversation where we did see Katiso Molefe, who's now been granted bail of 400,000 rands, one of the cases that he's been accused for is for the murder of Armand Swart, who was thought to have been a whistleblower. That was a mistarget on their end. And in your white paper, I mean, you speak about the stories of various whistleblowers, that being Adam Klein, Tatolo Sitlai, and Babita Deokaran. How do you see the personal narratives of these whistleblowers reflecting just on the broader issues of justice, state accountability, and most importantly, social trust in our country?
So that's a very important point that you brought up about Armand Swart, was that he wasn't a whistleblower. It was a mistaken case of whistleblower identity. rather, and that there is no provision in the legislation as well, which is what I had not mentioned in the previous point. There's no provision to protect those mistaken as whistleblowers. So that could be added to future legislation. In terms of what their contributions are, is that they've all served in the public good. If we look at the case of Tatola Setlai, I mean, he had exposed an extremely compromised detention services system, right, and was only retaliated for. Instead of, he had moved, it was essentially moved from pillar to post and somehow rehabilitated in the end. Someone like Adam Klein had finished off way worse than him. Adam Klein, after refusing to prosecute 5 black individuals under the past laws, his disclosure essentially started in 1980. He had then provided evidence that a black person failing to produce a pass was detained for an average of 6 days. And because of his disclosure, he was subjected to state surveillance, censorship. He had to relocate to Namibia, came back, and was still subjected to surveillance, and then died a lonely death. And he's unacknowledged. We've given him no sort of posthumous recognition. So I think that they present themselves as very important elements to holding wrongdoers to account. That is speaking truth to power, because that's essentially what it is.
Certainly.
But, sorry.
Yes, continue, but
the rewards for them are non-existent. Quite the contrary. I don't know of any whistleblower that has come out of the disclosure in South Africa yet better off, or at least the same as what they were pre-disclosure.
And speaking about those rewards not necessarily being there for whistleblowers, the contrary is just the power dynamics that the perpetrators quite often have. I mean, what systemic factors do you believe enable some of these powerful networks of corruption to retaliate quite effectively against these whistleblowers?
It's interesting. I'm actually working on a paper on that right now. Is that I believe that comes down to the political economy that we find ourselves in. And it's such that those at the very top, the problem with disclosure is that you're typically reporting on those individuals that are at the top of a hierarchical structure. And in doing so, that disclosure will inevitably reach those individuals, whether it's within an organization, whether it's on a state level. So to make some sort of meaningful reform or meaningful implementation of the law becomes very difficult when you want to hold those people at the very top to account. And I think that that mimics what you're saying in your question, is that it's very difficult to do something meaningful when the structure is such that it's lopsided. It's working against those truth tellers.
In your opinion, how do you think civil society should be contributing in not only protecting whistleblowers, but also just encouraging a culture of whistleblowing so that there's more people who belong within that shift, rather than it just being a few that then have to be protected against these perpetrators?
So we're lucky that South Africa has had that civil society in South Africa has had a prominent role in supporting whistleblowers. We've seen many organizations, and I don't want to name them here as if I'm advertising them, but we've got numerous organizations that have been active in South Africa from, I would even say, the late 90s to date in supporting whistleblowers. And what I would also like to qualify in civil society is media, because the role of media is also very important, because it can play the role of an active agent for better public change. But that role is also very fragmented between a number of organizations. So there needs to be some sort of overarching organization, be it an independent state institution, I'm not saying specifically a Chapter 9 or something, that would now bound together these organizations and better coordinate their efforts to offer more comprehensive support. And I think that civil society in many aspects is crucial. And also to bring in other stakeholders, former whistleblowers, current whistleblowers, and also invested and interested citizens.
Compared to other countries, do you think South Africa has more of an enabling environment for whistleblowers to come forward?
That's a very complex question. I think we have a high rate of disclosures coming forward. I think that we have accompanying a very high rate of disclosures, we've got a very high rate of retaliation against whistleblowers, which comes in myriad forms, from social ostracization all the way through to physical retaliation. I don't think that we have a good legislation to protect whistleblowers, and I think that retaliation is it's very high right now, but I do think that South Africa has space to move forward. I think that we have a very concerned and active citizenship, and there are disclosures still coming forward. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Doc, speaking of that high rate of retaliation, what do you think are the implications of that persistent retaliation and violence just for the broader culture of active citizenship that you make mention of, as well as ethical accountability?
Yeah, I think that it raises a warning post to others to not want to step forward when they see what's happening to your Mospakua, what's happening to Babita Diakaran, what's happening to Jimmy Mohlala. I think that it rings fear into people's bones, and they're scared to come forward because they don't want the same repercussions. And I think it inevitably has to have an effect. I would need to see some sort of empirical evidence as well. And I think that's it should be researched on a state level. But my presumption of this, my opinion, is that it has an effect. And even if we're not just considering those whistleblowers that have been murdered, those that are suffering other forms of retaliation, that are suffering work-related retaliation, being suspended with bogus charges, subjected to disciplinary hearings, ostracized by their family and friends, subject to lengthy legal proceedings that are generally trumped up with bogus charges. I think that it all serves as a sort of warning to people to not step forward.
Lastly, Doc, I mean, what would you say is, in the research that you've done, the most surprising or the most overlooked whistleblower story that you have uncovered?
That's difficult. I think that there's quite a lot of them that haven't penetrated the public domain recently. We've focused a lot on state capture whistleblowers recently, and understandably so, through the state capture saga, because their contributions were massive. But as we did that, we sort of put other disclosures by the wayside. So corporate wrongdoing is still corporate wrongdoing. So I think there are a lot of cases, covered and uncovered ones, that haven't gotten much public exposure. I wonder how many disclosures haven't penetrated the public domain because whistleblowers have been silenced within organizations through various NDAs and other confidentiality agreements and threats of loss of employment. So I think that there's droves of cases which we're not even aware of, and it's frightening to think.
Most certainly. Dr. Yugesha Rudolovich, apologies. Thank you so much for your time and just sharing the findings of your research with us. I certainly do hope that much of it will find reform within policies